Good afternoon all, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the Giant Group. Our topic today is managing your contractors in-house. Permanent recruitment has traditionally been the principal source of recruits, and most companies have had an in-house team or an RPO, and they've followed tried and tested processes. More recently though, the shrinking talent pool and the economic climate brought the use of contractors more into focus. So much so that the use of contractors is becoming more significant and a key feature now of mainstream recruitment strategy. That being the case, many of you will be considering how to change your approach and to ensure you get the best from your contractor recruitment. So our focus today then is going to be on the processes you can implement and the benefits you can look for, the key features of a great contractor management process, and also recruiting talent and managing workers internationally to address skill shortages, which is obviously a key feature these days. Your speaker today is going to be Dan Haslam. Dan is Group Sales Director at Giant Group and also a member of the board at the FCSA. He's got vast experience of helping clients to manage their contingent workforces compliantly and cost effectively. I'm David Hopkins, a workforce management consultant with Giant. And I'll put your questions to Dan in response to his description of the various options. So in terms of questions, please submit them now or as we go through using the Q&A button that you have on your screen there. I'll pick all of those up and I'll get through as many as possible of those with Dan when we get to the fairly extensive question and answer session. So we're ready to go. Good afternoon, Dan.
Hi, Dave. Good afternoon, everybody.
Right, Dan, let's start. First of all, perhaps you just tell us a little bit about Giant. Tell us what you do and tell us what Giant do. And then let's then have a look at the typical contractor recruitment process as you find it, and what you feel are the areas that we could be looking to improve.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Giant Group have been around now for 30 years and we specialise in contractor contingent workforce management. So anyone who's not a permanent employee of a business, we can help support businesses engage those individuals, whether that's from a timesheeting perspective, a payrolling perspective, financing. We also have an ATS within the group as well that can be used to help on the search and selection. So we work with a real wide variety of businesses, hire us directly in various sectors, as well as all the main recruitment agencies in the UK, again, helping them manage payroll and compliantly operate with contractors. And as anyone knows who operates in this space, there's a whole raft of legislation and risk that people can trip themselves up with, and we try and take that pain away, basically, Dave.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then let's look at what you find and with the contractor recruitment process and how it works and what's changing. What should we be looking out for?
Yes, I think there's a few different ways that businesses look at engaging with contractors. And the first bit I think that's important to sort of really take stock of is how actually a hiring company actually look at recruiting those individuals. So often I find now it's the case that there's in-house talent teams working within hirers that are looking at attracting permanent talent into the business and have quite a well tried and tested process for bringing those permanent people in, interviewing them and then onboarding them. And then when it comes around to the contracting piece, you get a variety of different ways that people will manage that. Again, some businesses have got good processes around recruitment of contingent workers as well. But often I find it tends to be a little bit more Wild West, shall we say, in terms of what's happening there in terms of that onboarding process and some of the controls around that contractor piece, because it is ad hoc and it's coming in sometimes in waves. It's not as well worn a process as it is as the permanent recruitment that takes place. So I often find it's either an in-house talent team that are focused on bringing in the contractors as well as the permanent heads, or often there's actually a PSL of recruitment agencies used to support contingent hiring as well as sometimes on the permanent hiring as well. So the in-house teams will go to fulfill roles, but where they can't, or they haven't got the necessarily, the talent bank to support that, then they'll go out to a recruitment PSL. Typically that could be 3 to 4 recruitment agencies. And those agencies will help with the search and selection piece and bring those people through. Those agencies can then also go on to help support the management of those contractors and the payrolling of those contractors. Whether that's them, using their online timesheeting system if the hirer doesn't have one themselves, payrolling them through to various payroll companies that these contractors might be wanting to be payrolled through as well. So that's the sort of main 2 areas. And then the third one that tends to be more so currently is used much more by the larger hirers is the use of an MSP type arrangement or managed service provider arrangement. And that's where a business comes in and basically manages that whole hiring process, either delivering recruitment themselves directly or delivering it with using a PSL of recruitment agencies, and manages the support of those contractors. And what I often see in the market is that that's a good model that can work well for large hirers, but it's often not something that's delivered to companies that are engaging relatively small numbers of contractors. And by that, I mean anything from sort of, 10 through to say 20, 30 contractors. And actually, I think that's a big miss in the market. I think there's some big benefits available for hiring businesses to get some good rigor into that process, because as you said at the beginning, Dave, more and more now, especially with the talent shortages that are out there, we're seeing that contingent workers, contractors are being used frequently to support gaps in people's permanent employment, skill shortages. And so having a good contractor value proposition, I think, is an area that hirers definitely need to look at. And that's something that obviously we want to try and explore a little bit more today.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that traditionally contractors have not been given the same sort of attention in terms of selling the business to them and offering them something that they want to belong to, as you might with a permanent worker. They are just recruited almost on an ad hoc basis to come in, do a job and go again, and not really have any real involvement with what's going on around them and integrating into the culture and so on.
Yeah, I think that's.
I think that was when there was lots of people available. That was okay. They came and they went. But now, when you've got a talent shortage, then I think you've got to work a bit harder to get people to come and want to work for you.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a few different factors around that. I think that hirers have been told, as well as hirers have been told a lot by their legal teams, that they need to keep contractors at arm's length, because they, if you try and treat them like an employee, or you engage with them like an employee, you're into that terrible world of IR35 and some of the risks around that as to whether people are should be taxed as employees or not. And of course that is true from a tax perspective, but that doesn't need necessarily to mean that your engagement with those contractors needs to be at arm's length in terms of the proposition to them and the value proposition to a contractor. There's a lot of talk in the market about employee value proposition, but I also now hear this phrase contractor value proposition as well, because contractors often come and work for companies on a frequent basis, and so their experience that they have through an onboarding process, the buy into the brand that they're working for or the sector that they're working in, is of interest to them. And of course, the talent attraction specialists on this call will know better than me, but sometimes the source of your new future employee in the business is actually a contractor that's come in and enjoyed working for the brand. So sometimes when that talent attraction piece is outsourced to different parties, then some of that can be lost. Not all the time at all, but sometimes it can. And I think that's a bit of a shame. And I think moving forward, where there is such a skill shortage and it'll just continue to get more and more acute, then I think businesses just need to sort of reshape and rethink about how they're bringing talent in. And if you can get contractors to come in on multiple assignments, you can build out that talent pool, so you've got people that you can call upon, then that's important, rather than just being a number to plug a gap. It's a big resource for people. I think there was a Deloitte report came out last year and said some of the larger companies who talk about headcount often have another 60% on top of that headcount that sit in that area around, which is basically contractors or working with suppliers that engage with that business. So very, very big, large part of the talent
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I've always found is that when you talk to a hire of lots of people, you ask them how many contractors have you got, and it's a bit of a rude awakening for most of them because they really don't know. Because I think that the whole control process of bringing them in and onboarding them and managing them is just gets spread to the four winds, and very often you'll find hiring managers will just go off and do their own thing without any recognition of a central budget or central management and control process, and companies just don't know how many they've got. So
yeah, no, that's an absolute classic. I think every time you ask any business, how many contractors do you engage with, 99% of the time they'll say to me, we're not actually sure. Because there isn't a pinch point there that's sort of managing that or a register of it in the same way that you would have on a permanent headcount. You can't just simply go onto your HR system and see how many employees you've got. But it is entirely possible to do that if you build the right system around it to bring it in. And of course, again, especially in the world that we're living in the moment, in terms of costs, costs are always important, and just sometimes getting full visibility to the number of contractors that are engaged in the business. If you're getting efficiencies out of them, you only need to reduce that number by 2 or 3 heads, particularly for high paid roles in IT, for example. Significant cost savings being made, and actually, much better visibility for the business on the impact that these guys are having as well. If you can get the right processes and systems in place, you can see the spend, you can attribute that to your projects that are ongoing, and see the return that you're getting on the investment to be much more efficient. And I don't think it's by design that hiring managers like to do their own thing. They're obviously trying to get the job done and get someone in to get a role done, but clearly the business needs some control around that, making sure they know who's engaged in the business, have they accepted the right documentation and onboarding requirements, are they working with suppliers that are charging a reasonable margin as well, and that those costs are being managed also. Making sure the process for the contractors, I was going to finish off to say, Dave, making sure that the contractor's experience is a good one. If there's no control around it and they're coming in and it's a little bit Wild West, it doesn't create a great impression of the business. Whereas if you're coming in, it's structured, it's nice, steady process, they're getting all the documentation and they're ultimately getting paid on time, which is the big one for them, then they're much more likely to want to work for the business again.
Yeah, well, we'll come on and we'll look at that contractor experience, because I think that's becoming increasingly important. So I think what we've established is that there are definitely two different streams of recruitment, if you like. Contractors is getting a bigger proportion. It's becoming more mainstream, and therefore requires a bit more rigor and control and benefit to everybody that's involved. So if those are some of the shortcomings, then how can we improve that process and make it a little bit more consistent?
Well, I think the first bit is, where it's feasible, is for the in-house recruitment team to be looking at trying to bring the management of those contractors in-house as well, rather than feeling like we need to outsource this. Because the closer you can stay to this, the closer you are to the detail, then the better that experience will be. Now, clearly, there's a bit of a balancing act to be made there between bringing everything in-house, but then having the bandwidth to actually support that and to be able to deliver the service. And that's where a business like us could come in to help support. But I think it's if you're close to the process because you're involved in it, then you can start to see where the break points are. You can see where the onboarding piece is slowing down potentially. You see businesses that might outsource pre-employment checking, for example, to recruitment agencies or to a third party. So there's a business over here that's doing that part of the process, and then there's another business over here that might be doing a payroll part of the process, and becomes a little bit disconnected. So if you can bring that in-house and you can have a process that sort of brings that all together with some technology around it, then that's definitely going to have some big benefits for the contractors. Obviously, if you're bringing more of that process in-house, you're having more face time with that contractor as well, and they're being dealt with directly from a communication perspective rather than having a number of different people involved in that process. That's definitely going to help the contractor feel happier about that engagement and who he or she is working for. The process is likely to be a lot quicker as well in terms of negotiating on rates. It's always a good one, isn't it? But there's obviously always back and forth in terms of day rates, and it seems those rates only ever seem to go in one direction, which is up and up and up due to the scarcity of talent at the moment. So being able to speed that process up is important. I think certainly last year we heard lots of stories about clients getting frustrated because contractors were falling out of processes because they were getting counter offers elsewhere with higher rates coming round. So again, having a slick process that onboards people quickly means you get the right talent, you get them in and committed on the contract, rather than increasing the risk of losing them to someone else who's looking for talent as well. So I think there's a number of different reasons why that's important. And as you said before, Dave, I think if you bring it a bit more in-house, you get a bit more closer to the process, you get that control, so you start managing down the risks, but you also start managing down your costs. And also, you know, everyone's held accountable for that. But if you know who you're dealing with, you've got visibility to it. As a HR and talent attraction team, you can present a much more compelling case back to the business that you're actually managing those costs, as opposed to just flicking the switch to say, right, we're recruiting now, and then, you know, the thing gains momentum and sort of becomes its own beast. So if you're gonna recruit, then make sure you've got the right control around it.
Yeah. And are you finding that people are more interested and now using more of the concept of talent pools? Because I think what's happened in the past is you'll get a great contractor and he'll do a job and he or she will go away again. And 6 months or a year later, everybody's desperately trying to remember who it was, where they went, where they came from. And I think the idea of, again, being able to have access to proven talent that you'd like to keep in touch with, is that something that's happening?
I think it's something that's been spoken about for a long time, and I still don't think anyone's really nailing it. I think it's tricky for businesses, certainly who are occasional users of contractors, for them to have that robuster process. But it's certainly something you should aspire to. I think if you're a business that's engaging contractors on a frequent basis, I see talent pools being used quite a lot in the public sector now, or at least the software's in place to help manage that. So, you know, if nurses are called upon from a particular trust, then they'll have a talent bank of people that they can call up, and you can actually now start to see those trusts working together to overlay multiple talent pools, so people can go and work for different hospitals in different locations, which just makes complete sense. I think for private sector businesses, they tend still to rely heavily on recruitment businesses to support them in finding those individuals. But if they can, you know, if doing that good work to get a good process in place, own that engagement with the contractor and bring them on board, then it's not too big a leap of faith to then have a sort of bench, so to speak, of people that you can then lean onto. The consultancies are very good at this. They frequently have benches of people that they're engaged with that they can bring in at short notice. But I don't see any reason why that same concept couldn't be done by a hirer directly, as long as they've got, you know, relatively good frequency of work for people to come on board. Then that's something they should be doing to reduce their costs and reduce the reliance on other suppliers to help support the search and selection.
Yeah, and given the general shortage of talent at the moment, we're going to come and look at how you might do it. But are we starting to see people are looking at further afield, looking at overseas talent and engaging them in as contractors, either in situ or whatever?
Yes. Is the short answer to that. It seems to really accelerated last year. So again, not relevant for every sector, but where you've got sectors where people can deliver services remotely or do the work remotely. So again, IT would be an obvious one you'd think of here, but also a lot of the other white collar professions as well. Then yes, you're seeing contractors now start to get hired from abroad, but you're also seeing UK-based contractors who have moved abroad wanting to still work in the UK market, but they're now operating from, you know, Portugal or Spain or Dubai and other places. Don't know how much of that's been IR35 based in terms of people getting squeezed now or having to pay tax and then they've moved overseas, but hirers are more than happy to engage them. And obviously when they're engaging workers overseas, then things like IR35 don't apply in that respect, because that's only applies to people based in the UK. So you have that. But just much more of an awareness now for, particularly again in IT, that there are people sat in lots of different geographies that can operate and deliver for people on projects at a much lower cost than a UK day rate might be. So, you know, we see a lot of Near East countries like Bulgaria and Romania and around there, where you're seeing a lot of people placed. We talked a bit about risk before and making sure that you're doing the right checks on people when you're bringing them in. That clearly applies when you're operating with international contractors as well. You need to make sure that they're being engaged with the right suppliers and being processed. But again, a business like ourselves or an MSP business can come in and help manage that, so it's not too scary and just really opens up the talent pool. I don't think it's a cost thing that's driven it, though. I do think it's the pure scarcity of talent that's really pushed this along. But it's scaling up massively. It's one of the reasons why Giant are now offering international payroll solutions, because we can see this trend is growing, and people, you know, if they can get work and they can work remotely, then they'll take it.
Yeah, I think it's always probably been one of those things that it sounded too hard to do, and we didn't really need to do it because there was enough talent locally. But now that's starting to change. But I also think that companies like Giant are now able to put in detailed practical solutions to support people to manage all the different aspects. So there's candidate care, there's international onboarding, there's all those other things that need to be done. So we'll come back and touch on that again later, perhaps, and just as another avenue. But what I'd like to concentrate on now, then, though, I think is the benefits that we can get by potentially bringing in in-house. And looking at what are the key features, what the contractors want, and what kind of benefits will be driven out for hirers if they think about doing this in-house, either with support or on their own.
Yeah, I think there's just I mean, from a contractor perspective, they're certainly focused on three things, I would say. So the first is they just want to be onboarded swiftly. So by that I mean that they want they want to be able to engage with people quickly about an assignment that's been advertised. They want to have a quick negotiation on the assignment, and then go through whatever that onboarding process is in as least painful way as possible. So, you know, most businesses now will have a number of documents that they want someone to accept as they're coming in, whether that's, you know, intellectual property, health and safety documentation, whatever that might be. So just using technology to support that, so that a contractor can accept those documents quickly, as well as their assignment, is one thing. I think then that carries over into pre-employment checking and onboarding, whether that's UK based or internationally, making sure that that process is acted quickly, that the relevant checks are done, that whoever's doing that piece of work is proactive in getting that worker through from A to B, rather than just simply, you know, a tick box exercise to say, yeah, we made a call to chase upon this reference, but they're actually delivering that quickly. So the contractor's not sat around waiting to engage and thinking, actually, is this going to come off, or do I need to go and hunt elsewhere? So get them through and onboarded as quickly as possible. And then when you move into payroll, they just want to be made sure that they can get paid as quickly as possible, and that they get paid what they're expecting to be paid, which sounds pretty simple and straightforward, and it should be. But if there's multiple different parties involved in a supply chain, then often that can sometimes be more difficult than it needs to be. So I think making sure that people are thinking through having a good timesheeting process, for example, and making sure that that's really slick, easy for someone to use. It's going to save time then for both the contractor to submit the timesheets as well as the hiring manager to approve. I think that's a really important part of the process. I often see where there's multiple people involved in a supply chain that sometimes contractors are asked to submit 2 or even 3 timesheets. So they might have to submit one for the client directly. They're then having to submit one for perhaps the recruitment agency that's found them, and then they're also having to submit one to their payroll or umbrella company if an umbrella is being used. to get someone paid. So that just feels really strange that there'd need to be 3 different places for that contractor to push out the same information. And actually, if you take a step back and you look at those processes, they can be knitted together much better, and to ensure that just one particular part of that process, for example, the timesheeting process with the hirer, can be taken and that data can be fed down to those other parties, rather than having to ask that individual for entering it 3 times. Clearly, if you've got 3 different points of data entry, that's 3 different ways that data could be inconsistent. That then creates delays in payment, and then you get in a contractor who's frustrated. So that's important. And I also think the offboarding piece as well, which is often not thought about as much in contractor world as it perhaps is in the permanent recruitment space, but making sure that the offboarding process is also slick and easy, and that the contractors had a good experience throughout, gives them much more likely to be a chance then that they'll want to re-engage in that talent pool, as you mentioned before, Dave, or engage on the next assignment that's pushed out by that hirer directly. And that's really what talent attraction teams should be looking at doing over time, is building out some loyalty from that contractor base as well. Because that'll make all the difference then when they're looking for people, if they can have a bench of contractors there who could also recommend some of their contractor colleagues as well, can make all the difference to fulfilling those roles.
Well, the contractors certainly do talk, and I think it's very hard to get a good reputation and very easy to lose it. So that process is vital, especially in where we are today with people having more choice. It's a seller's market in many ways. So I think that's important. So
right, there's a lot. I mean, again, I've mentioned IT contracting a few times here, but those guys, they live on internet forums, and regularly talking to each other, engaging their own community in a lot of respects. So if you can tap into that and get a reputation as a good hirer, then that comes across well. I've seen apps on the market that talk a bit like a sort of Glassdoor, if you will, type approach, but it's for contractors to sort of rate and discuss hirers, or even agencies that they've worked through, and whether it was a good or a bad experience. And so, quality of experience is what we're all looking for. And the more that these guys can become brand advocates for you to their community, then the much more likely it is that'll help with your search and selection problems.
Yeah, and I wonder how many good people have been lost to companies who've had a great job to offer, and they just haven't been quick enough at getting it in front of them and getting them through the onboarding process. I suspect a lot.
Loads. I know it's when we deal with some of our recruitment agency partners, that's the speed and the slickness of the onboarding, which is the key thing for them, because they're acutely aware that if they don't place that contractor quickly, someone else will come along and do the same. And actually, when you get into the weeds of some of why the reasons for some of these delays and why it does take some time to get people onboarded, it's often because someone's not picked up a phone, basically, and that a process was put in place and an expectation that something was going to happen where actually it just needed a phone call to kick the thing along. And that, the power of a phone call can be quite a big thing here to get things over the line.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, just before we get to some questions then, let's just come back to that international recruitment we mentioned, and tell us some of the practicalities that need to be addressed there, and some of the planks of that, if you like, that are maybe different to what we already know. What does being international bring that we don't currently have to deal with?
I don't think it brings anything more than what you deal with now. It's just probably a bit more rigor. And by that, what I mean is that you can engage contractors in the UK via suppliers, whether that's recruitment agencies or payroll providers that will engage those workers. And you can do exactly the same thing with international as well, because there are companies out there that will engage contractors on a hirer's behalf, and they will payroll those contractors after they've received funds from that hirer. You just need to be aware of making sure to some level that those businesses are compliant. And that's hard enough in the UK. That's with my FCSA hat on for a second. FCSA is known as a good, reputable trade association for umbrella companies, but it's by no means, the only trade association out there, or HMRC approved. You need to do your own due diligence as a client to understand that, and that applies even more so to international. What I observe in international is there seems to be an even longer stack of suppliers that operate in that chain. So you might engage with one company who says that they're offering a global payroll service, but in actual fact, there's another one or even two suppliers that sit underneath that money is flowing through. And that can present some risks to the hirer ultimately if the wrong person's engaged. So I think having a high level view on due diligence and asking the right questions to the suppliers is important, whether it's UK or international. I think from a pre-employment checking and onboarding process, again, it's the same thing really as a UK process, just that your international screening checks are going to hit databases that sit overseas in other countries. So if you're dealing with the right screening partner, then they'll have access to those databases and they'll be able to help. And we'd again be happy to facilitate that conversation if that was an area of concern for anybody on the call today. And then I think it's just making sure then that you've got a right partner in place who understands that particular country, can help support the queries and candidate care piece from that contractor. So again, when you look at the international payroll market, again, it's very software heavy driven. You know, engaging this platform, it looks nice and simple and easy to use. But if something doesn't go quite right, is there a person on the phone there that you can speak to sort of move that piece along? Because inevitably there'll always be a question. Someone will get a wage slip and not understand one part of it. So there needs to be some checks done to make sure that there's the right level of candidate care in place there as well to support that person. But again, that applies to UK as well as international. It just means on the international piece, the supplier's got to have a broad lens to be able to understand the, you know, the various regimes and tax regimes in each country. So I wouldn't expect a hirer to try and bring in-house international payroll capability. Not at all, but making sure that you've got good supplier due diligence to pick the right suppliers that you wish to work with and ask the right questions will go a long way to help support. And don't be afraid of hiring talent from abroad. Like I said, it is on the rise. It is not just a preserve of the larger corporate businesses. I think it's something that any size business should be comfortable engaging with and posting those jobs out internationally. And then just make sure you engage with the right supplier to manage it for you and look after that individual and get them paid on time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay, so I think that covers the process and some of the benefits of managing contractors and how we might do that. Let's have a look at some of the questions that we have. And the first one I have here is from Aaron, who asks, if you're going to engage a limited company contractor, in addition to certificate of incorporation and public liability insurance, what other documents, indentures would you typically request?
Okay, well, I'll make the assumption, Aaron, that we're talking about UK now as opposed to international, but although there's not too much difference between the two, you certainly want to be checking the insurance piece, as you've said, making sure that you've got a to whom it may concern certificate there that covers the values that you need covering. I would also be asking for company registration number, VAT registration number, making sure you're doing a check on company's house to see that the businesses exist on company's house. And then from a company checking perspective, that's pretty much it, to be honest. And the next level down is whether you're then checking on the individual and the person. But insurance, yes, but absolutely company registration number, and then a quick check on company's house to see that you see that business and that you recognise the individual who's the director of that business tallies up with the individual that you're engaging with, assuming that it's a one-man band personal service company that you're engaged with.
Okay, right, thank you. The next one then is how does this work with recruitment agencies? I presume we're talking about managing contractors in-house. Would we have to effectively replace their timesheet and payment process?
Okay, so not necessarily. It depends is the answer. So you absolutely can have a process that works whether or not you've directly sourced a contractor or if you've relied on a recruitment agency to do the search and selection. Often you see hirers relying on the recruitment agency to then also go on and provide timesheeting as well. But you can deal with you could deal with suppliers that can do that. We deliver timesheeting to hirers, so that all their contractors use it, no matter whether they've been sourced via recruitment agencies or they've been sourced in-house. And that's good because it's a consistent piece of software then across the whole population. Again, I talked before about making sure that people are paid quickly and paid on time. If you've got, I don't know, 20, 30 contractors here and 10 of them over here are using one software platform and 5 over here are using another, you can see how that can start to lend itself to some inefficiencies in the process. Whereas if you've got a consistent online timesheeting piece running across the top, the hiring managers are all using the same timesheeting system to log in and approve time, just makes it a much better experience for everyone and increases the chances of, or reduces the chances of payroll delays and inaccuracies.
Okay, good. And the next one is, do you have any examples or case studies where this approach has worked?
Yeah, we do. We've got there's case studies on our website, giantprecision.com, that you can go on there and see many a case study where we operate with businesses in lots of different sectors. So pharmaceutical, IT, financial services, done some healthcare in the past as well. So yeah, no, there are examples out there where it is of benefit to people, and it depends what those benefits are. For some of our clients, it's been about driving down cost, as you'd expect, and for others, it has just been around trying to give back time to hiring managers and people in their businesses that have spent too much time running around trying to put sticking plasters over processes that are slightly broken, chasing around timesheets and trying to get people paid, and actually, outsourcing that to a business like ourselves to manage, so that hiring managers are getting that time back. They can focus on their job. If it's a talent attraction team, they can focus on search and selection, and we can support managing all the other bits and pieces to make sure people are processed and happy. But yeah, no, it's certainly a model that works. And I do think it's something that businesses that operate smaller numbers of contractors should be investigating. I think there's big efficiencies. It's not necessarily that expensive if you get the process correct to put in place. And I think there's a big gap in the market there that could be something to explore.
Yeah, okay. Well, just as you touch on there, the size of teams and the software you might need, I've got 2 questions here which perhaps we can answer together. So the first one is, what size of team might I need for running a squad of, for example, 30 contractors? And the second part of that is, are there systems available to provide the contractor management we need in onboarding, timesheeting and payroll? Just so if we're doing it in-house, what sort of a setup, what sort of size and what sort of support can we get to do that?
Yeah, I don't think you need it. Well, if you've got the right partner to support on the onboarding piece, the timesheeting and the payroll, then it's as big as you need as your talent attraction team that you require. So I work with businesses that are running between 100 to 300 contractors, and they've got 3 people in the talent attraction team that are doing resourcing, and the rest of it is managed by ourselves. So doesn't need to be a big team. It needs to be a team that's focused on what they're good. That's classic square peg for a square hole, right? You want them zeroed in on doing the talent attraction piece. That's the headcount that you need. Then you outsource the rest. Or if you make a decision you don't want to outsource some of that and you want to keep it in-house, then obviously you build that out, and that increases that'll increase the headcount slightly. I work with some businesses who, they want to retain the pre-employment checking in-house and the referencing, and they run through that through their existing teams, but they want to outsource the payroll, for example. So horses for courses, Dave.
Okay. Right. Okay. And another one now, back to costs, I think, and back to the integration with agencies. Is the agency fee still the same if we're managing contractors using our systems and processes?
Again, good question. It depends. So it depends how you want to operate with those agencies and how much work the recruitment agencies are doing within that process. So that's often one of the areas that we see here, is that, recruitment agencies are charging a fair percentage because they're not just doing search and selection, they're doing the onboarding, they're doing the check-in, they're often providing funding, which is getting more and more expensive here as well in terms of payment terms to that hirer. So paying the worker quickly and then waiting, 60, 90 days for payment down, and that has cost associated to it. So If you start to look at outsourcing some parts of that, then you're probably also looking at outsourcing some of that cost. So, for example, if you start to reduce the requirement for the recruitment agency to focus on what they really want to focus on, which is the search and selection piece, then there is an opportunity to look at reducing that margin down over time, because those guys are happy the fact they're not having to do funding on top of it. They're not having to do pre-employment checking on top of it, which is not their core activity. They're also happy in some respects because for some of our clients, the agencies move to a margin only basis where they're not in the supply chain, they're not in the contractual chain taking any risk. So for a recruitment agency who's working on a margin only basis, then that's really great business for them, because they just get paid a margin for doing the search and selection without having to deal with all the other complexities of managing, AWI legislation or IR35, which we've mentioned a few times. So it does depend. And the other way of looking at it is not only that you might want to reduce margins to the agencies, you might want to continue the margins at the same rate, but you're outsourcing more of that work to make your roles more attractive to that agency to work on as well. So again, it just depends where the hire is at with the panel of agencies, whether or not they're looking at increasing the agency proposition and the benefits to the agency of working with them as a brand. It's entirely possible to do it both ways.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And one final one. This is back to the international aspect. Is it possible to work with candidates from any country, or are there some where it will not work?
Well, technically, it's possible to work across any country. Russia isn't a favourite location for a lot of people at the moment in terms of them engaging. So I'd suggest probably going to be the trickiest country to engage with. China's probably then the second one. But we see currently, lots of businesses sort of sidestepping Russian placements, but outside of that, no, it's pretty open market. There's suppliers out there that specialize in Europe and the Middle East, or EMEA as it's referred to, and then Asia Pac, the Asian countries and the Far East, the suppliers there, as well as Latin America and the US. It's very rare you'll come across a supplier that will do all of that themselves directly. They'll often have a number of different suppliers to support in certain jurisdictions. But no, there's not any country really that's not available to you, as long as you got your timings right and you can do the interviews at whatever time in the day you need to interview those candidates. Then it's probably your sleep that's the limiting factor there, Dave, rather than geography.
That's becoming increasingly an issue. Yeah. Good. Okay, well, listen, I think that's coming to about the time we set, the 45 minutes. So thank you for your attention, everybody. I hope that's given you a good flavour for what's possible. And I'm sure you're having to think about it, because it's becoming more of an issue, and you're probably looking to be more organised consistently across your whole recruitment strategy. So thank you, Dan. I think that was good. Hopefully the questions were good enough to draw out what you needed to know. And I trust you found it a useful session. We will, if you want any further information, we'll be sending you, if you've given us your email address, we'll send you Dan's contact details. We'll also send a copy of this video for reference, and a transcript of the questions that we've had. So hopefully that's helped. Thank you again. Thank you from me. Thank you from Dan. Goodbye and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.